Hello and welcome to this live stream panel event hosted by Defending Rights and Dissent. I'm Nathan Fuller, Communications Manager here at Defending Rights and Dissent, where we've long advocated in defense of those detained, arrested, or otherwise targeted for exercising free speech in support of Palestinian rights, particularly since the genocide in Gaza began in October 2023. To respond to the crackdown, Defending Rights and Dissent has covered the legal cases of those arrested, like Mahmoud Khalil and Rumeisya Ozturk. We filed an amicus brief in support of Khalil. We filed FOIA requests to uncover the U.S. government's relationship with private vigilante groups who target pro-Palestine protesters. And we publish a regular newsletter, the Gaza First Amendment Alert, recapping the latest threats and attacks on free speech. But today we're covering the case of one protester who is still in detention and whose case hasn't received nearly the amount of attention that it deserves. Leqaa Kordia is a 33-year-old woman of Palestinian descent who has lived in New Jersey since her arrival to the United States in 2016. Israel's genocide in Gaza has taken the lives of nearly 200 of Leqaa's relatives in Palestine. In April 2024, Leqaa joined campus protests at Columbia University calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. She was among hundreds arrested that day on misdemeanor charges that were dropped shortly thereafter. But that arrest led the Department of Homeland Security to target Leqaa, and they spent the next several months surveilling her, monitoring her activity, and interrogating her friends and family. Nearly a full year after her arrest in March 2025, Leqaa was arrested and swiftly transferred to a detention facility in Texas. An immigration judge has twice ordered her release on bond, and twice the DHS has found legal loopholes to keep her in detention, even after releasing other jailed protesters like Khalil and Ozturk. In January, 10 months into her detention, Leqaa wrote an op-ed for USA Today detailing the filthy, overcrowded, and inhumane conditions of her confinement. A month later, she was hospitalized, and for several days, her family had no confirmation of her whereabouts or her condition. She remains in detention today. Defending Rights and Dissent calls for Leqaa's immediate release. She has clearly been targeted for exercising her right to free expression, an affront to the First Amendment. We've organized a coalition of fellow civil society groups in a joint letter sent this morning to outgoing DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, urging Leqaa's release. To talk about the latest developments in Leqaa's legal situation, how Leqaa is doing in detention right now, and what comes next for Leqaa and the fight for her release, I'm proud to be joined by Leqaa's cousin, Hamza Abu Shaman, and two of her lawyers. Sadaf Hassan is an attorney for Muslim advocates, representing Leqaa in her federal habeas case. Sarah Sherman Stokes is an attorney and professor with the Boston University School of Law and Immigration Rights Clinic, representing Leqaa in her immigration proceedings. Thank you all for joining me today. And Hamza, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us how Leqaa is doing right now after her recent hospitalization and how she's been doing after nearly one full year of confinement?
Hey, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me on the show. Leqaa is in good spirits. Her first seizure sent shockwaves to not only her legal team and her family, but around the world. She's slowly recovering. I talk to her a few times a week, if not almost every day. And there's ups and downs. Some days she feels good. Some days she feels still dizzy, a little weak. She's on medication now for a few years after what's happened. And overall, she's sad that this is her second Ramadan being spent in ICE detention, let alone the fact that she was, dragged away from her home and her family 1,500 miles away last Ramadan. Overall, it's sad that she's not with her family during the holy month of Ramadan. So that's like the biggest impact that it's had on her. But she's one of the strongest women I know in my life. So she's still in good spirits and tries to have a good attitude. And she's extremely grateful for her legal team and all the support worldwide and all the media coverage that's been helping raise awareness with her case.
That's fantastic. And just want to let people know later in the show, we're going to flash an action tool on the screen that you can use to write your representatives to urge them to call for Leqaa's release. So Sarah Sherman Stokes, if we can turn to the legal side of things, you are representing Leqaa in her immigration proceedings. Now, people might not realize that many of these targeted students and protesters have actually been dealing with two legal proceedings at once, and this was true of Mamoun Khalil and others. Leqaa is fighting a federal habeas case over due process concerns, and then separately, she's fighting an immigration case where the government's attempting to deport her. So can you tell us why Leqaa is still in jail if on two different occasions an immigration judge has ordered her release on bond? And like what loopholes is the government relying on? Have you ever experienced this kind of judicial defiance in other cases?
Thank you so much, Nathan. Thanks for having us, and thanks for amplifying Leqaa's story and case. So I should start by just saying Leqaa has an incredible legal team. That's Sadaf Hassan and I, but also others from Muslim Advocates, the CLEAR Project, Texas Civil Rights Project. So she is very lucky to have an incredible team of lawyers representing her in her case. Not all folks in detention are so lucky. But to answer your question, why is Leqaa still in custody? It's a great question. Leqaa should be free. An immigration judge, as you mentioned, has twice ordered that she be released on a $20,000 bond. The judge has found that she is not a danger. And in fact, the government has completely abandoned that argument. Vacuous as it was, there was never any evidence that Leqaa was a danger, and the government gave that argument up. They've argued that she is a flight risk, despite overwhelming evidence of family support from friends and community members, evidence that she's going to return to, her home in New Jersey, where she's lived for the past 10 years, where she's been a valued member of the community and of her family. That's where she should be now, not celebrating her second Ramadan in detention. But instead, the government has blocked the judge's order with an auto stay, a rarely used legal loophole to keep her confined. And they've done this despite, courts across the country who have found that these automatic stays are likely or actually are unconstitutional. So Leqaa has a third bond hearing coming up. That is, for me personally as a lawyer, I've been practicing immigration law for well over a decade, and I personally have never had a client have to, be subject to 3 bond hearings. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that Leqaa is being targeted with this kind of sort of government aggression because she is Palestinian and because she is Muslim and because she spoke up for Palestinian liberation. She is being held to a much higher standard than other clients have been. But she will have a third chance, hopefully, to be released on a bond and reunite with her family, hopefully before the end of Ramadan, but we'll see.
Just a small follow-up on that. Does the fact that other pro-Palestine protesters or students have been released after detention, does that have an impact on the potential for Leqaa's release?
It's a great question. Every case is different. Every case has its own different kinds of, sort of mitigating or ameliorating factors. Every case has a different procedural history. So on one hand, each case is unique. On the other hand, neither Leqaa nor any of the other pro-Palestine protesters should have been detained in the first place. And in that way, she is just like them. They should be free. They should be at home with their families. No one should be targeted for exercising their constitutionally protected First Amendment right. Certainly, no one should be disproportionately targeted for speaking up for Palestine, which is what we're seeing happen here.
So let's turn to Sadaf Hassan. You represent Leqaa in the federal habeas case. So can you talk about these two different tracks? Does what happened in the immigration case affects what happened in the federal case?
Yes, and thank you so much, Nathan, again, for having us and amplifying Leqaa's story, so especially as Friday marks her 1-year anniversary of being in ICE custody. As you mentioned, there are 2 different parallel tracks in seeking Leqaa's immediate release from ICE custody. One is an immigration court, which Sarah just discussed in terms of an immigration judge now releasing her order on bond not once but twice, and then in federal court where there is that strong interplay. I'll give a little bit of an overview of the kind of arguments that we're making in her federal habeas. So, we are challenging her immigration confinement as being unconstitutional, retaliation under the Fifth Amendment on due process grounds and the First Amendment for her protected speech and advocacy, based on that protest that she attended outside the gates of Columbia University that put her directly on ICE's radar 1 year later to further this administration's agenda to weaponize immigration laws to squash free speech and organizing. So on the due process claims, we argue that her confinement is unconstitutional because the government, as Sarah just mentioned, invoked the auto stay in violation of her procedural due process rights. And then given her significant liberty interest to be free from confinement, we argue that is the basis for her substantive due process claims, in the sense that the government doesn't have a legitimate government purpose to keep her confined other than punishing her for her advocacy on Palestine. In the habeas, we also include several deprivations of her religious liberties in ICE custody. As both Hamza and Sarah have mentioned, this is her second Ramadan in ICE custody. Leqaa is a very deeply spiritual and practicing Palestinian Muslim woman, and she's been subjected to various religious liberty deprivations in terms of like not getting halal meals, no quiet, clean place to pray, lack of privacy. So that's wrapped into the habeas. In terms of the current latest of what's going on, her case has taken several twists and turns because of the procedural gamesmanship that ICE has played to block her release each time. So in June, the magistrate judge actually recommended that Leqaa be released, holding that the automatic stay is likely unconstitutional. What ICE did shortly after the magistrate judge releasing that report and recommendation is that they switched out the automatic stay for something called a discretionary stay, which the Board of Immigration Appeals essentially rubber stamped in less than 24 hours without giving Leqaa an opportunity to respond. So basically the basis of her confinement changed from one that was automatic to discretionary. So instead of the district judge making their decision after receiving the magistrate judge's report and recommendation, it got kicked back over to the magistrate again to reconsider her earlier recommendation because of the narrow decision she made based solely on the auto stay. So since July, we've been waiting for the magistrate judge to issue this new report and recommendation. And a lot has happened since July, in the sense that our team has diligently submitted various briefing to push her to kind of issue a new report and recommendation, given all the things that have happened. So since July, again, Leqaa was released on bond in August, which again, the government for the second time invoked the auto stay. For the second time, the BIA rubber stamped the discretionary stay. Since then, we also updated the court in terms of the hospitalization that happened, in which ICE disappeared her. Counsel did not know for 72 hours. Her family did not know for 72 hours where she was and what was happening to her. So after that hospitalization, we submitted further briefing to kind of uplift her substantive due process claims, given the impact of having nearly 1 year prolonged confinement since when we initially filed the habeas. And most recently, Sarah just flagged that Leqaa has her third bond hearing on Friday, and given what we've seen twice now of ICE invoking the auto stay, and then shortly after changing the basis with the discretionary stay, we filed an emergency motion to prevent the government from invoking the auto stay and discretionary stay a third time, and the judge on Monday ruled that it was speculative because it had not happened. So just to zoom out a bit, this is also part of the government's strategy of what they were doing with Mahmoud and Rumeysa and Mohsen Mandawi is, abducting people from where they are, flying them multiple state lines to Texas, Louisiana, forums that are conveniently favorable to the Trump administration, not only in federal court, but also in immigration court. So the kind of pace that we're seeing her case move, seeing how the government is playing all these gamesmanship and the district judge, saying it's speculative that it may not happen again. And I really hope that it doesn't happen again after on Friday, and that the district judge is correct in that. So it's all intentional, it's all political in terms of why nearly 1 year later, Leqaa is still held in ICE custody despite an immigration judge already releasing her on bond twice.
Sounds really horrible, the conditions she's been dealing with, and she's been subjected to, it sounds to me like religious discrimination. So the decision about the auto stay, is there hope for improving her conditions in prison if she doesn't succeed on the other claims?
So in terms of, the Fifth Circuit and habeas claims, there is actually kind of a separation in terms of the conditions claims outside of kind of the other claims that we are arguing in terms of in terms of arguing that her confinement is unconstitutional on First Amendment and due process basis. So it is somewhat separate, but we've kind of are connecting the dots between like the conditions in terms of it being her first hospitalization, and just connecting the dots with the substantive due process claims of giving her emergency hospitalization, and the fact that it's because of the malnutrition, it's because of the lack of sleep, it's because of the stress and anxiety of being in ICE custody for a year that raises the stakes in terms of her liberty interests of being further confined.
So let's come back to the broader fight for Leqaa's release. And again, Hamza, so Leqaa's case has just not gotten the same amount of media spotlight that some others have, though I know the New Yorker did do a profile of her last October. More recently, some other outlets are finally covering the fact that she's this last pro-Palestine protester still in detention, even after these others have been released. Can you just talk about the efforts to get more attention on Leqaa's case in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, the reason why her case wasn't amplified early on speaks volumes of the person she is and why she's even here, right? Why she came to America. I mean, you think of someone that comes from an apartheid state her whole entire life, she came seeking for freedom. And like the general definition of freedom is the ability to think and act and speak without restriction, or like the power to choose how to live and act without oppression, right? And that's the world that she comes from. So when she was here for almost 10 years already, early on, she begged myself and her legal team, like, hey, I'm not this like political activist, right? Don't go to the media, because she had a lot of faith in this country, right? Hence why we have to peel the onion back and why she was here, because she's not used to this type of treatment. And it was after her second bond hearing, I think it really settled into her saying, okay, like I am for sure being targeted politically, to piggyback off of what Sadaf said. And so that took a while for her to like actually come to terms with the fact that she was targeted. So early on, she really hit the pause button because she didn't want anyone to take away from what's going on in Palestine and what's going on in Gaza selfishly. That also speaks volumes to the person she is. She's extremely selfless. So now that brings us to today, where a lot of the people in this world know about her and know about her case. So what they can do now is continue reaching out to the local electives, local leaders, get Congress involved, the Senate involved. Follow her on Instagram, which is a free Leqaa Kordia. If you can support financially, there's a link there. There's a bunch of petitions online that they can sign on her behalf. And no matter how big or small one's platform is, the ripple effect of people just knowing about her name is profound. And a lot of people oftentimes feel that they have a small platform or their voice might not matter. But even if you could connect with one other person that doesn't know about her case, that's just going to ripple effect into more and more people knowing about her case. So the ask from the family and the legal team is to just make her name much more known worldwide and put pressure on the government to do the right thing and actually follow the law and hopefully bring her home sooner rather than later.
So speaking of efforts to just get attention on this case, Sarah or Sadaf, tell me if this is a question for you. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani recently spoke with President Trump, and reports indicate that he asked the president to look into Leqaa's case. Do you have any update after that conversation was reported? Do you think more of that kind of pressure is the way to get attention on her case?
So we were really pleased to hear that Mayor Mamdani raised Leqaa's case with President Trump. We're glad to hear that he's raising the cases of, all of the Palestinian protesters who have been unfairly targeted by this administration. It's hard to quantify or evaluate, what lever, we're sort of pulling out a lot of levers, and it can be hard to evaluate sort of the direct impact of one or the other. But certainly we think, it may have accelerated the timeline for some decision making from the Board of Immigration Appeals, which we're grateful for. But at the end of the day, it's hard to say. I think I would echo what Hamza said, which is, it's important for all of us to do what we can to reach out to elected officials, to put pressure on people in power, to make the right decisions, to free protesters who are being unfairly targeted. But I would also say that, Leqaa would be the first to emphasize that, she is not the only one in detention. Her case and her story is getting a lot of attention now, which we're very, very glad for. But she is always also interested in amplifying the experiences of other women who are detained with her, other women who are mothers and sisters and daughters and cousins, and who had entire lives with their families outside before being detained by ICE. And the struggles that she's going through are also their struggles. The lack of medical care, the poor and filthy conditions, the overcrowding, the malnutrition, that's not something that she alone is experiencing. There are about 70,000 people detained by ICE. So I just wanted to mention that as well. But yes to continuing to put pressure on people in power to alleviate the conditions of Leqaa's suffering and everybody else's.
And Leqaa just wrote about for International Women's Day. She had a really beautiful piece for Zeteo News that people should check out, speaking up for others in detention as well. So speaking of those in power, Sadaf, maybe a question for you. Trump's Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, has either been fired or reassigned after mounting criticism over how the department has been treating protesters more generally. Does that present an opportunity to get fresh eyes in the department on Leqaa's case for them to potentially review it again?
Yeah, that's the excellent and very timely question. And I think that's everyone's minds right now, especially because a lot of litigation has named Secretary Noem as a defendant and a slew of immigration policies. I would say, although we're concerned about the track record of Mullen and him likely being in lockstep with the Trump administration's anti-immigration agenda, I think we'd hope that any incoming secretary, particularly given the scrutiny that led to Noem's termination, would recognize that DHS has the obligation to make individualized determinations regarding custody, and to recognize that in Leqaa's case, there is no basis for ongoing confinement, especially as we'll see, hopefully at her third bond hearing, which is in front of the same immigration judge, what will unfold in terms of, hopefully having a third release order on bond, which the government, by the way, has conceded that, Leqaa is not a danger. So we're hopeful that maybe this is an opportunity for fresh eyes, especially given the scrutiny that Noem has had.
Can we expect to hear news as soon as the end of day Friday? Or would we have the Friday hearing and then expect to hear next week or later?
That's a great question. We anticipate, I'm hopeful that we will have some resolution by tomorrow afternoon. Of course, this is immigration court. Things could go sideways. She was previously scheduled for a third bond hearing earlier this week that was abruptly canceled. But we're hopeful that tomorrow afternoon we'll have some news. Again, I think the question remains whether the government will again invoke the automatic stay, which, to be clear, doesn't require anything of the government substantively. It requires them to just check a box on a piece of paper. And I think the question is whether or not they'll invoke that auto stay again, which would foreclose her and her family from paying bond, foreclose her from returning home. We hope that they will not do that, but I think that remains to be seen.
We have an action tool where people can get involved, but more specifically, there's recently a letter going around in Congress right now, I understand, from Senators Cory Booker and Andy Kim and Representative Nellie Powell. Can you talk about that letter and what you expect might come of it? For any of you, I guess.
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to chime in. I think this is, to the larger point that that Hamza was making earlier, which is that this kind of political pressure does matter. As many elected officials as possible who can, get behind Leqaa's case, who can put pressure on the administration and on the Department of Homeland Security to do the right thing. That matters. Continuing to amplify the stories of people like Leqaa who are in custody is really important. We saw recently that Representative Castro helped reunite two brothers in a mariachi band who had been detained by ICE and separated from their family. So I think the power of elected officials is, I think we can often feel cynical about the ability of folks to create change, especially in these really dark authoritarian times. But it does matter. And so having, a lot of robust support in Congress for Leqaa, it matters. It matters not just for Leqaa, but for all the other people like her and the people that will come after her. So I'm glad to see that, and I hope that it gets a lot of support.
Yeah, and I can just chime in to say, I think we've personally seen a shift in terms of, the more attention her case has been getting, the more pressure that it's been putting on ICE. So we've been engaging, as part of our strategy with elected officials. Texas State Representative Salman Bojani has been a really great advocate for Leqaa, and Hamza can talk a little bit more if he wants about this. But they had a pre-approved visit to visit Leqaa at Prairieland, which on the day of was canceled. And we're very pleased to know that very recently, actually, Rashida Tlaib was able to visit Leqaa and spend time with her. And so to us, it's, it's about also just accountability and transparency, not only for Leqaa, but all people who are confined by the for-profit immigration system. For elected officials to be able to go inside, to monitor, to see what's going on is a really huge deal.
Hamza, feel free to add anything to that. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and get this action tool up.
Yeah, I would just piggyback off of that. I feel like that's when Representative Bojani, myself, and one of her other lawyers, were denied after being granted access there. It sent a very profound message to everyone, essentially, of what exactly are they trying to hide? I've gotten confirmation emails in the past with the okay to visit her, and then I'll get a cancellation email because they would cancel for whatever reason. Not myself, nor did her other lawyer, Travis there, or Representative Bojani received any type of email or notification saying that it was canceled. In fact, shortly after the press conference that took place on that Friday, we started seeing families granted access to that detention center physically and from the inside. The actually messaged me saying, how come your visit got canceled? I'm seeing inmates now get visitations from family. So it's very obvious that they targeted us, and that was planned as well. And then Sadaf and I were on the ground in DC lobbying for her. This was before her hospitalization, and we asked a lot of people in Congress to try to get a congressional delegation, write a letter. And then it was only unfortunately, it was after her hospitalization is what really amplified her story. So it's almost like a blessing in disguise that happened. Moving forward, if Leqaa was listening right now, it shouldn't take someone being hospitalized for 72 hours and chained to a bed for, the leaders of this country to have any type of respect for the Constitution, right? Freedom of speech is granted to all people in America. And it goes back to the reason why I said, it's the reason why Leqaa was here. If you really think about it, she was protesting in America about another foreign country and what they're doing to another country, right? It doesn't make sense for someone to be detained in the land of the free. So I'm grateful that Rashida Tlaib kind of spearheaded the first visit and posted it on her social media. And the hope there is that she could round up her colleagues, her friends, and people on both sides, whether they're Republican or Democrats, and then leaders in general, to just, amplify her voice, not only for her, but for everyone that's wrongfully detained.
Seems really clear we need more politicians to speak up. I'm glad they've started to. But so as I mentioned, this is a bicameral letter. There are 2 senators and 1 representative on it so far. but we need others to sign on. So you can use the action tool that we're going to flash on screen in just a moment. Just take a minute to copy that URL down, and that will bring you right to an action page where you can modify or use the letter we've set out there in the template for you to write to your representatives, your senators and your representatives, and urge them to sign on to this letter, to communicate the urgency of speaking up for a detained protester who's been in jail for a year, and to speak up for the First Amendment. So please, take that down and take a minute to take action today. Before we go, I'll give Hamza one more chance to talk about any other ways that people can get involved in Leqaa's campaign. I know there's the Instagram account, Free Leqaa Kordia, where people can get updates. We will certainly continue to cover this case at Defending Rights and Dissent, rightsanddissent.org. So I want to thank all the panelists for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to discuss Leqaa's case and the importance of speaking out. So thank you very much. And Hamza, we could close with you if you just want to let us know any other ways that people can get involved.
Yeah, thank you for giving me that, opportunity. I would say, one of the things that really keeps her sane and has something to look forward to being there for an entire year now is receiving letters, right? She talks to me and the legal team all the time, but sometimes that can get a little boring. She might get sick of me. I don't know if she gets sick of the legal team, but receiving letters from those that care goes a long way. So if anyone wanted to hold like a small community, letter writing event to her, they can get in contact with myself or the legal team, and we can kind of strategize on ways to do that. And then last but not least, I've said this before, I'll echo it again, is follow any type of page in solidarity with her, and just repost, not once, not twice, not 3 times, as many times that it takes until she is free. Because oftentimes it's just a click of a button, right? But I think it's more important to keep on amplifying her story and letting people that don't know about her, let them know about her, right? Until everyone knows about her, because oftentimes people tend to act when pressure is on, and the more pressure that we can create, the better.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining me today. And thank you all for watching. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.